Jake Martinez tightened the last bolt on the broken radiator in apartment 3B, his calloused hands moving with practiced efficiency. The October morning carried a chill through the thin walls of Riverside Commons, the kind of low-income housing complex where maintenance calls never stop coming. He wiped his hands on his work shirt and glanced at his watch. Emma would be waking up soon in their small apartment on the first floor. The building had been quiet until now, just the usual sounds of families starting their day. Coffee makers gurgling to life, shower pipes rattling, the distant hum of morning television. Jake had learned to read these sounds over the past 2 years, the way a sailor reads the ocean. Everything had its rhythm, its normal pattern. That's why the raised voice from apartment 4C immediately caught his attention. He paused in the hallway, toolbox in hand, listening. A man's voice, sharp and angry, cutting through the morning calm like a blade. Then a woman's voice, softer, pleading. Jake felt his chest tighten with a familiar tension he thought he'd left behind years ago. Before we continue with Jake's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe these kinds of tense situations happen frequently in apartment complexes where you're from. The voices rose again, and Jake found himself moving closer to the door, his maintenance uniform giving him the perfect excuse to be anywhere in the building. His hand gripped the toolbox handle tighter as years of training whispered in the back of his mind, instincts he'd spent 2 years trying to silence. Jake set his toolbox down quietly and pretended to examine the hallway light fixture directly across from apartment 4C. The argument inside had escalated, and through the thin door he could make out fragments of conversation that made his stomach clench. "You're nothing without me," the man's voice snarled. "Where do you think you'll go with that kid?" The woman's response was muffled, barely audible. Jake had heard that tone before, years ago in his other life. The careful, measured words of someone trying not to provoke further anger. He twisted the light fixture unnecessarily, buying time to assess the situation. In his previous career, he would have protocols to follow, supervisors to call, legal authority to intervene. Now, he was just Jake the maintenance guy, a single father trying to keep his head down and his daughter safe. The sound of something crashing against the wall made him flinch. A picture frame, maybe, or a lamp. The woman's voice rose in a quick, frightened protest before being cut off by another angry outburst. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his phone, then stopped. What would he tell the dispatcher? That he heard raised voices. That something might be happening. He knew how these calls went, how long it took for units to respond to domestic disturbances in this part of town. A child's voice joined the mix inside the apartment, high and scared, asking Mommy what was wrong. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, seeing Emma's face in his mind. 8 years old, just like the voice behind that door sounded. The argument suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence that felt worse than the shouting. Jake forced himself to finish with the light fixture and head back toward the stairwell, but his steps were slow, deliberate. Professional habit made him note the time on his phone. 7:43 a.m. As he reached the first floor, Emma's door cracked open. His daughter peered out, her dark hair messy from sleep, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. "Daddy," she whispered. "I heard people being loud upstairs." Jake knelt to her level, smoothing her hair with gentle hands. "Just some neighbors having a disagreement, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Emma's eyes held that too-wise look that broke his heart every time. She'd seen enough upheaval in her young life when her mother left 2 years ago. Jake had promised himself then that he'd create a stable, quiet world for her, away from chaos and crisis. "Are they okay?" she asked. Jake pulled her into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "They will be," he said softly, though the words felt hollow. After getting Emma dressed and fed, Jake walked her to the bus stop 3 blocks away. The October morning air was crisp, and she chattered about her upcoming school project about community helpers. Jake smiled and nodded, but his mind kept drifting back to apartment 4C. When he returned to Riverside Commons, the building felt different, too quiet. He climbed the stairs slowly, noting that no sounds came from behind the door where he'd heard such anguish just an hour before. Jake was checking the hallway smoke detectors when the door to 4C suddenly swung open. A tall man with sharp features and cold eyes stepped out, nearly colliding with him. The man wore an expensive leather jacket that seemed out of place in the worn hallway. "Watch where you're going, maintenance man," the stranger said with a sneer. Marcus Thompson, according to the lease Jake had seen in the office files. He looked Jake up and down dismissively, taking in the work clothes and tool belt. "Sorry about that," Jake replied quietly, stepping aside. "Just doing routine safety checks." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the narrow hallway. "Safety checks, right? Tell me something, handyman. You hear anything this morning you shouldn't have?" The question was casual, but Jake caught the underlying threat. He kept his expression neutral, years of crisis training kicking in despite himself. "Just doing my job, sir. Is there a maintenance issue in your unit?" Marcus stepped closer, invading Jake's personal space. The smell of cologne mixed with something sharper, more aggressive. "My business is my business, understand? You're just the guy who fixes broken toilets and changes light bulbs. Stay in your lane." Jake nodded slowly, recognizing the intimidation tactic. "Of course. If you need any repairs, just submit a work order through the office." "That's what I like to hear," Marcus said, patting Jake's shoulder with false friendliness. A man who knows his place. That evening, Jake sat at their small kitchen table helping Emma with her math homework. The apartment was cozy, filled with her artwork and the warm glow of evening light filtering through clean windows. This was his sanctuary, the peaceful world he'd built for them both. "Daddy, why do some people yell at each other?" Emma asked suddenly, her pencil hovering over a multiplication problem. Jake looked up from the worksheet, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes adults have big feelings they don't know how to handle properly. It doesn't make it okay, but it happens." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "In my old school, Mrs. Peterson taught us about using our words nicely. She said angry words can hurt people's hearts." The simple wisdom in her statement made Jake's chest tighten. "That's very smart, sweetheart." Mrs. Peterson was right. As Emma returned to her homework, Jake found himself remembering his previous life. The late-night crisis calls, the domestic violence shelters, the training sessions on de-escalation techniques. He'd been good at it, helping families find their way through impossible situations. But that life had cost him everything. The long hours, the emotional toll, the cases he couldn't save. When Maria left, she'd said she couldn't compete with his job anymore, couldn't watch him carry everyone else's pain while neglecting his own family. Now he fixed radiators and changed light bulbs. Simple problems with clear solutions. No one's life hanging in the balance. No split-second decisions that could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. 3 days later, Jake was replacing a broken window lock in 2A when he heard the screaming. Not arguing this time, but pure terror from apartment 4C. A woman's voice, high and desperate, followed by a child crying. He dropped his tools and moved quickly down the hallway. Through the thin door, he could hear Marcus shouting about money, about respect, about teaching lessons. Then came the sound that made Jake's blood run cold. A sharp crack, like a hand meeting flesh, followed by a woman's gasp of pain. The child's crying intensified, and Jake heard small footsteps running across the floor inside. "Mommy, Mommy, are you okay?" the little voice wailed. Jake's hand was already reaching for his phone when he heard Marcus's voice turn deadly calm. "You want to cry, Sarah? I'll give you something to cry about. And if that brat doesn't shut up, he's next." Every instinct Jake had spent 2 years suppressing suddenly roared to life. He knew that tone, had heard it in dozens of crisis situations. The moment when an abuser crosses from intimidation to real violence, when someone's life hangs in the balance. His finger hovered over the emergency number on his phone, but he knew the response time for this area, knew how these situations could escalate in the minutes before help arrived. The child's terrified, sobbing continued, punctuated by Sarah's quiet whimpering. Jake closed his eyes and made the decision that would change everything. Jake knocked firmly on the door, his voice taking on a tone he hadn't used in 2 years. "Building maintenance. I need to check your electrical panel. There's been a power surge reported on this floor." The shouting inside stopped abruptly. After a moment, Marcus's voice came through the door, irritated but controlled. "We don't need any maintenance right now." "Sorry, sir," Jake replied, using the calm authority he'd once employed in crisis situations. "Building code requires immediate inspection after power surges. Safety issue. I can come back with the fire marshal if you prefer." He heard Marcus curse under his breath, then footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, Jake could see past Marcus into the small living room. Sarah sat on the couch, holding a little boy who couldn't have been more than 4. Her left cheek was red and swelling, her eyes wide with fear. "Make it quick, maintenance man," Marcus said, stepping aside with obvious reluctance. Jake entered, his trained eyes quickly assessing the situation. A lamp lay broken on the floor, its shade cracked. Sarah's hands were shaking as she tried to comfort her son, who was still sniffling from crying. "Electrical panels in the kitchen," Jake said, moving toward it while positioning himself between Marcus and Sarah. As he opened the panel and pretended to examine the breakers, he kept his voice conversational. "Everything okay here? Heard some noise earlier." Marcus moved closer, his posture aggressive. "Just family business, handyman. Nothing that concerns you." Jake continued his inspection, buying time while his mind raced through de-escalation protocols. But Marcus was growing impatient, pacing behind him like a caged animal. "You done yet?" Marcus snapped. "We've got things to discuss as a family." "Almost finished," Jake replied, noting how Sarah flinched at Marcus's words. The little boy had stopped crying, but remained pressed against his mother's side. That's when Marcus made his mistake. He grabbed Sarah's arm roughly, yanking her to her feet. The boy tumbled from her lap, hitting the floor hard and beginning to wail again. "I said we need to talk," Marcus growled, his fingers digging into Sarah's flesh. Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked desperately at Jake. "Please don't hurt me. I'm already broken." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd heard those exact words before, in countless crisis situations. The moment when someone realizes they have nothing left to lose, when desperation overrides fear. Marcus laughed cruelly at her plea. "Broken? You don't know what broken looks like yet." He raised his free hand, and Jake saw Sarah close her eyes, bracing for the blow. The little boy screamed for his mommy from the floor. Jake's training took over completely. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and caught Marcus's wrist mid-swing, his grip firm but controlled. "That's enough," he said quietly. Marcus spun around, his face contorting with rage. "Get your hands off me, you worthless maintenance monkey. This is none of your business." Jake maintained his grip, his voice dropping to the calm, professional tone that had once commanded respect in crisis rooms. "Marcus, I need you to take 3 deep breaths and step back from Sarah." The use of his name startled Marcus. "Who the hell do you think you are, ordering me around in my own place?" "Someone who's seen this situation before," Jake replied evenly. "And someone who knows how it ends if we don't de-escalate right now." Marcus tried to jerk free, but Jake's hold was precise, applying just enough pressure to control without causing injury. Years of training in restraint techniques made the grip feel effortless. "You're making a mistake, handyman," Marcus snarled. "You have no idea what you're messing with." Jake's eyes never left Marcus's face, reading micro-expressions and body language the way he'd been trained to do. "I know you're angry about something that happened before I got here. I know Sarah and your son are scared, and I know you don't really want to hurt them." The professional assessment seemed to penetrate Marcus's rage for just a moment. His muscles relaxed slightly, confusion flickering across his features. "That's good," Jake continued, his tone steady and reassuring. "Now let's talk about what's really bothering you today, without anyone getting hurt." For a moment, Jake's technique seemed to be working. Marcus's breathing slowed, his posture relaxing slightly. But then his eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing rage. "Wait a minute," he said, studying Jake's face more carefully. "You talk like a cop. Are you a cop?" Jake maintained his calm demeanor. "I'm exactly what I told you. Building maintenance. But I've had some training in conflict resolution." The sirens in the distance were growing louder. Someone had called the police, probably another tenant who heard the commotion. Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with racing against time. Marcus heard them too. His face darkened. "You called the cops on me, didn't you, maintenance man?" "I didn't call anyone," Jake replied truthfully. "But they're coming, and when they get here, everyone's going to be a lot safer if this situation is calm." The sirens were getting closer, maybe 2 blocks away. Sarah had gathered her son in her arms, both of them pressed against the far wall, watching with wide eyes as Jake continued to hold Marcus in place. Detective Rivera was the first through the door when the police arrived, her weapon drawn but lowered when she assessed the controlled scene. "Everyone okay in here?" she called out. Jake slowly released Marcus's wrist, keeping his hands visible. "The immediate threat has been neutralized, Detective. The woman and child need medical assessment for potential injuries." Rivera's eyebrows raised at the professional language. She looked from Jake to Marcus to the clearly frightened Sarah. "Okay, let's sort this out. Sir, step away from the others, please." Detective Rivera handcuffed Marcus while her partner took statements from Sarah and began documenting her injuries. Rivera then approached Jake, her expression curious. "That was some impressive crisis management," she said quietly. "Most maintenance workers would have called 911 and stayed out of it." Jake shrugged, trying to downplay his actions. "Just didn't want to see anyone get hurt." Rivera studied his face. "The way you controlled the situation, your language when we arrived. You've done this before, haven't you?" Jake looked across the room where Sarah was holding her son, both of them safe now. The paramedics were gently examining the bruise on her cheek, while she whispered reassurances to the little boy. "A long time ago," Jake finally answered. "I used to be a licensed clinical social worker, crisis intervention specialist with the county." Rivera's eyes widened. "Used to be. What happened?" "Life happened," Jake said simply. "My wife left because the job consumed everything. I chose my daughter over my career. Took this maintenance job because it has regular hours and comes with housing." "But you still have the skills," Rivera observed. "That was textbook de-escalation in there. You probably saved that woman from serious injury." Jake nodded toward Marcus, who was being led away in handcuffs. He was escalating fast. Another few minutes, and someone could have been hospitalized or worse. "We could use someone with your background as a consultant," Rivera said. "Domestic violence cases are our biggest challenge." 2 weeks later, Jake was installing new locks on Sarah's apartment door when Emma arrived home from school. She dropped her backpack and ran to hug him, as she did every day. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him with bright eyes. "My teacher says you're a hero now." Jake smiled, ruffling her hair. "I'm just your dad, sweetheart. Same as always." But Emma's expression was serious beyond her years. "Mrs. Garcia told us about heroes in our community. She said heroes are people who help others even when it's scary or hard." Sarah appeared in her doorway, her bruises now faded to yellow shadows. Her son peeked out shyly behind her legs. "Jake," she said softly, "thank you again. For everything." Detective Rivera had kept her word. The police department now called Jake twice a week to consult on domestic violence cases. He could work from home most of the time, reviewing case files and developing intervention strategies. The pay was better than maintenance work, and the flexible schedule meant he never missed picking up Emma from school. Marcus had been sentenced to anger management classes and supervised visitation rights. Sarah was attending counseling and had enrolled in a job training program. As Jake finished the last screw on a new deadbolt, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of using his talents to make a real difference. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or if you've witnessed someone's hidden talent emerge in a crisis like Jake's did.